Welcome back to another video. There's a certain kind of voice, and a certain kind of presence, that only happened in the 90s. Not manufactured by a marketing team, not built from a viral moment, but earned, note by note, film by film, in an era when a single performance could stop an entire room. The women on this list didn't just dominate the charts or the box office separately. Many of them did both at the same time, redefining what it meant to be a triple threat decades before that phrase became a marketing buzzword. Few people fully remember just how much power these women held during this era, breaking sales records, headlining film studios initially doubted, and quietly opening doors for an entire generation of artists who came after them. But here's what makes this list so emotional. Some of these queens are still performing, still selling out arenas, looking almost exactly the way you remember them. A few walked away from the spotlight entirely to build quieter lives. And tragically, a couple of the most beloved names on this list are no longer with us, their voices and performances now permanent time capsules of an era that will never quite happen the same way again. In this video, we're honoring 15 of the most iconic R&B and movie queens of the 1990s, their rise, their impact, and exactly where their legacy stands in 2026. Some of these stories will make you smile. A few will genuinely break your heart. Stay until the end, because the way this list closes is meant as a tribute, not just a countdown. Let's begin with the voice that arguably defined the entire decade. 1. Whitney Houston. There may never be another voice quite like Whitney Houston's, and by the time the 90s began, she had already redefined what a pop and R&B vocal performance could sound like. Few people know just how much resistance Houston initially faced early in her career from certain radio formats and industry gatekeepers who weren't sure how to categorize an artist with her particular vocal power and crossover appeal, a hesitation that seems almost unthinkable looking back at just how dominant she quickly became. However, that's only part of the story. In 1992, Houston made her leading film debut in a romantic thriller that paired her music career with genuine dramatic acting for the first time, a decision many industry insiders questioned at the time given how much she already had to lose. The film's soundtrack, and one particular ballad from it, became one of the best-selling singles in music history, a vocal performance so technically demanding and emotionally overwhelming that it's still regularly cited by vocal coaches and fellow artists as one of the greatest recorded performances of all time. What happened next surprised even those who already considered Houston one of the greatest talents of her generation. She followed that film with additional leading roles throughout the 90s, proving her box office and critical appeal extended well beyond her music career, at a time when very few recording artists successfully carried major studio films. Unfortunately, Houston's story also includes a well-documented and deeply painful struggle with substance abuse that increasingly affected both her health and public image throughout the late 90s and 2000s, a battle she spoke about with remarkable honesty in later interviews, even as it visibly took a toll on both her voice and her personal life. In 2012, Houston passed away at just 48 years old, a loss that devastated the music industry and fans across the entire world, many of whom had grown up with her voice as the literal soundtrack to their most significant life moments. Looking back, tribute after tribute in the years since have consistently returned to the same central truth, that Houston wasn't simply one of the most successful artists of the 90s, she was quite possibly the single most technically gifted vocalist of her entire generation, a talent whose influence extended into nearly every major R&B and pop vocalist who came after her. Now 2026, Houston's music remains a permanent fixture on streaming platforms and in vocal competition shows, where her signature ballad is still regularly used as the ultimate benchmark for singers attempting to prove their range. Her estate has continued releasing archival performances and a widely praised biographical documentary, ensuring new generations continue discovering her voice for the first time. Nearly 15 years after her passing, she remains, by wide consensus among critics and fellow artists alike, one of the greatest vocalists to ever live. 2. Janet Jackson, the pop icon. By the time the 90s began, Janet Jackson had already spent years stepping out from an enormous family legacy to build a genuinely independent artistic identity, one built around meticulous choreography, socially conscious songwriting, and a level of creative control that was still relatively rare for artists of her stature at the time. Few people know just how deliberately Jackson negotiated for that creative control, reportedly securing one of the largest recording contracts in music history at the time specifically to ensure she retained full authority over her own artistic direction. However, that's only part of the story. Jackson's 1993 album marked a significant, deliberate departure toward more mature, sensual themes, a bold artistic choice that some industry figures worried might alienate her existing fanbase built during her earlier, more family-friendly television years. Instead, the album became one of the best-selling records of the decade, proving Jackson's audience was more than ready to grow alongside her. What happened next surprised many who still primarily associated Jackson with music alone. She transitioned into film with a leading dramatic role in the mid-90s that earned her significant critical praise, further establishing her as a genuine multi-hyphenate talent capable of carrying both a concept album and a feature film with equal command. Unfortunately, in 2004, Jackson became the center of one of the most controversial and widely discussed moments in television history, a live broadcast incident that led to significant, and many critics and fans have since argued, disproportionate professional fallout that affected her radio airplay and industry standing for years afterward, while the male performer involved faced comparatively minimal consequences. Looking back, this discrepancy has become a frequently cited example in broader industry conversations about accountability and double standards, with numerous artists and commentators publicly re-evaluating the incident and its aftermath in the years since. Now 2026, Jackson has continued touring and recording steadily in the years since, and public and critical reassessment of the 2004 incident has shifted significantly in her favor, with major networks and industry figures publicly acknowledging the unfair burden she carried at the time. Today, she remains widely regarded as one of the most influential and boundary-pushing artists of the entire 90s era, her impact on choreography, production, and album as artistic statement filmmaking still cited by pop and R&B artists working today. 3. Halle Berry, Angela Lewis. Halle Berry entered the 90s already building momentum as one of the most promising young actresses in Hollywood, but it was a gritty, emotionally raw drama about addiction and struggle, in which she portrayed a character named Angela Lewis, that first proved just how far her range as a dramatic actress could truly go. Few people know Berry has spoken candidly in later interviews about how physically and emotionally demanding that particular role was, requiring her to portray addiction and hardship with a rawness that departed sharply from the more glamorous image audiences had of her at the time. However, that's only part of the story. Berry continued building a remarkably diverse filmography throughout the 90s, moving fluidly between television biographical dramas, ensemble comedies, and blockbuster franchise films, refusing to be confined to any single type of role, at a time when black actresses in Hollywood were frequently offered a much narrower range of parts to choose from. What happened next surprised even Berry's biggest early supporters. In 2002, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for a devastating dramatic performance, becoming the first black woman in the award's history to win in that category, a historic milestone that generated worldwide attention and cemented her as one of the defining actresses of her generation. Looking back, Berry has been candid about the complicated feelings that came with that historic win, noting in interviews years later that the moment, as monumental as it was, didn't immediately translate into the wave of comparable leading roles for other black actresses that many had hoped it would spark industry-wide. Now 2026, Berry has continued working steadily across film, and in more recent years, expanded into directing, taking creative control behind the camera in a way that mirrors the same determination that defined her acting career from the very beginning. Today, she remains one of the most respected and consistently working actresses to emerge from the 90s, her early performance as Angela Lewis still frequently cited as one of the rawest and most underrated of her entire career. 4. Angela Bassett, Tina Turner. Few performances in 90s cinema required the kind of total physical and emotional transformation that Angela Bassett delivered in 1993, portraying music legend Tina Turner in a biographical drama chronicling her rise to fame and her deeply painful personal struggles. Few people know just how intensively Bassett prepared for the role, reportedly undergoing months of dance and vocal training to convincingly recreate Turner's explosive, high-energy stage performances, insisting on doing as much of the performance work herself as possible rather than relying entirely on lip-syncing or body doubles. However, that's only part of the story. The role required Bassett to portray extremely difficult and painful material with both physical intensity and emotional restraint, balancing scenes of genuine trauma with the triumphant, larger-than-life stage energy Turner became famous for. Critics were unanimous in their praise, and the performance earned Bassett an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, instantly establishing her as one of the most powerful dramatic actresses of her generation. What happened next surprised many who expected Bassett might struggle to follow such a demanding, career-defining role. Instead, she continued building an incredibly diverse and consistently acclaimed filmography throughout the rest of the 90s and into the 2000s, taking on everything from romantic dramas to action films to prestige television, never allowing herself to be confined to a single genre or type of character. Looking back, Bassett has often spoken about the responsibility she felt playing a real, living person whose story involved genuine trauma, describing the role in later interviews as one of the most important and carefully considered performances of her entire career, one she approached with enormous respect for Turner herself. Now 2026, Bassett has continued working steadily for over 3 decades since, becoming one of the most respected and honored actresses in Hollywood, including receiving an honorary Academy Award in recognition of her extraordinary body of work. Today, she remains active in both film and television, still frequently cited as delivering one of the greatest musical biographical performances in cinema history, a role she brought to life with a level of dedication rarely matched before or since. 5. Vivica A. Fox, Jasmine Dubrow. Vivica A. Fox became one of the most recognizable faces of 90s blockbuster cinema through her role as Jasmine Dubrow in a massive alien invasion disaster film that became one of the highest-grossing movies of the entire decade. Few people know Fox has spoken in interviews about how significant the casting was at the time, representing one of the relatively few major studio blockbusters of that era to feature a black actress in such a prominent, emotionally central role within an ensemble cast dominated by A-list stars. However, that's only part of the story. Fox followed that blockbuster success with a steady stream of film and television roles throughout the late 90s, deliberately building a career across multiple genres rather than being defined by a single franchise appearance, including a stylish action comedy role that further cemented her reputation as one of the more versatile and charismatic actresses of the era. What happened next surprised many industry observers who watched Fox navigate an entertainment landscape that historically offered limited long-term opportunities to actresses coming off major blockbuster success. Rather than fading from the spotlight, she continued reinventing herself across film, television, and eventually reality television and hosting projects, maintaining consistent visibility and relevance across multiple decades. Looking back, Fox has often been candid in interviews about the importance of longevity and reinvention in an industry that doesn't always reward consistency the way it should, positioning her later career choices as a deliberate strategy rather than simply following whatever opportunities happen to arise. Now 2026, Fox remains an active and visible figure in entertainment today, having successfully built a career that spans acting, producing, and television hosting across more than 3 decades. Her role as Jasmine Dubrow remains one of the most fondly remembered blockbuster performances of the 90s, and Fox herself has become something of an industry example of how to sustain a long, adaptable career well beyond a single iconic role. 6. Jada Pinkett Smith, Lita Newsome. Jada Pinkett Smith built her reputation throughout the 90s as an actress unafraid to take on bold, unconventional roles, none more memorable than her performance as Lita Newsome in a gritty crime drama about a group of women who turn to bank robbery after a workplace tragedy. Few people know Pinkett Smith has described that role in later interviews as one of the most physically demanding of her career, requiring extensive weapons and action training to convincingly portray a character operating so far outside typical expectations for female leads at the time. However, that's only part of the story. The film itself became something of a cult classic in the years following its release, praised specifically for centering a story about complex, morally ambiguous black women at a time when Hollywood rarely greenlit projects built entirely around that premise. Pinkett Smith's performance was widely credited as one of the film's strongest elements, anchoring its emotional weight alongside a talented ensemble cast. What happened next surprised many who expected Pinkett Smith to continue primarily in film. Throughout the 2000s, she expanded significantly into music, forming and fronting a heavy metal band, and later into television production and hosting, building a media company and eventually launching a widely discussed talk show alongside her family that brought candid, often deeply personal conversations to a massive audience. Looking back, Pinkett Smith has become known for an unusually high level of public openness about her personal life and relationships, a choice that's generated both significant support and significant scrutiny over the years, but one she's consistently framed as an intentional effort toward authenticity rather than image management. Now 2026, Pinkett Smith remains a highly visible and multifaceted figure in entertainment today, having built a career spanning acting, music, production, and media entrepreneurship. Her role as Lita Newsome continues to be re-examined and celebrated by newer generations of fans discovering the film, often cited as ahead of its time in its portrayal of complex black women on screen. Looking back across all 15 of these queens, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. These weren't just artists who happened to be successful during the same decade. They were the architects of an entire era, women who wrote their own songs when they weren't expected to, negotiated for control when the industry assumed they wouldn't ask, and carried entire films and albums on performances that critics initially doubted a young black woman could deliver. Some of them are still filling arenas today, their voices barely changed by time. Others rebuilt their lives quietly after financial hardship, health battles, or industry double standards that would have ended most careers. And a few of the most extraordinary talents on this list never got the chance to grow old at all, their voices frozen forever at the height of their power. What makes this list different from almost any other is that it isn't really about looks, or fame, or even talent alone. It's about how much these women had to fight for a seat at a table that wasn't originally built for them, and how many of them turned that fight into some of the most enduring music and film performances of an entire generation. Whitney's voice still stops people in their tracks. Left Eye's fearlessness still echoes through every unpredictable verse from artists who came after her. Angela Bassett's transformation is still taught as a masterclass in commitment. These queens didn't just define the 90s. They built the blueprint that the entire genre still runs on today. And that's a legacy no amount of time can quietly fade away. If one of these queens brought back a memory, or if one of these stories genuinely moved you, let me know in the comments which one hit you the hardest. And if you loved this tribute to the women who defined an entire generation of music and film, subscribe, because there are so many more incredible stories from this era still worth telling.